Micron just reported fourth quarter earnings, beating on the top and bottom line. Revenue coming in above estimates at around $4 billion versus the average analyst estimate from analysts of about $3.93 billion. But the first quarter forecast was disappointing vis-a-vis what analysts had been expecting. Let's bring in Daniel Morgan, Senior Portfolio Manager at Synovus Trust. Dan, it's good to see you. I think there was a lot of sort of investor hope here that perhaps there was a bit of a corner being turned for Micron. Does this forecast dash those hopes, or do you think that's still sort of intact?
Well, it's not overly bad, Julie. If you look at the guidance for the upcoming first quarter, revenue expectations, we're looking for $4.2 billion. They guided $4.2 to $4.6 billion. They obviously guided, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of their loss for the upcoming quarter to be greater than what was expected. I think we're looking for 96 cents on the loss, and they guided higher than that. So we look at those metrics, it's kind of mixed. But you're right, there were a lot of expectations coming into this quarter. The stock has been up about 35% year to date, that we would see some sort of indication that we're getting a turnaround in the memory business. And obviously we haven't gotten into the conference call yet. We'll get a little bit more information, but everyone was expecting the second quarter to be the low point in the semiconductor space, and that we would start to see improvement going into the second half of the year. And obviously we're looking for evidence of that coming from Micron.
And Dan, do you see Micron as a smart AI play for investors?
It's interesting, Josh, because they do benefit from AI. They have two core memory products that they sell. One is called Double Data Rate 5, and they also have HBM3, which are memory chips that are used with AI chips. Probably the most promising is going to be HBM3. NVIDIA is going to be rolling out their new B100 AI chip probably in the second quarter of 24, and it most likely will combine with that product from Micron. But unfortunately, we're not going to get a NVIDIA-like impact from AI on this quarter. I think it's something that's going to play out over a longer period of time. You do have to bear in mind, Josh, that AI is extremely memory intensive. So it does play well for the likes of a Samsung or let's say a Micron going forward.
And how should we think about a Micron versus a Samsung or the other memory chip makers here? As we think about how AI is going to play out, obviously NVIDIA is the big first mover, dominant mover at this point. How should investors be sort of gaming it out along the stack and along its development over the next year?
Well, Julie, I think what we're hoping for is that they're going to give us a kind of a playbook going forward on how AI is going to roll out in the memory space. I mean, if we think of Micron, it's a very commodity-based business, right? It's not like, some of these other chip makers have very specific patents on their products. They have dominant market shares. You look at Samsung and some of these other producers in that space, and, DRAM and flash memory are very commoditized. So, hopefully AI, like I said, because of the growth of it, will generate future business for them and future strength. But I don't think we can look at them as like an NVIDIA, an AMD, or an Intel, or some of these other players. Marvell Technology has AI chips. We have Broadcom is in that space. They are very much more specific in terms of their exposure into AI. Will get a much bigger benefit, where Micron is more kind of going along for the ride. Does that make sense?
It does, Dan. Let me ask you also about China. We know regulators there have been throwing up some challenges for Micron. I'm interested, not what you think just about Micron's future in China, but really when you think about American chip companies. A lot of them obviously see China as an important end market. What does that opportunity look like for them, Dan, in the quarters and years ahead?
Well, Micron generates about 11% of their revenues coming out of China. Qualcomm derives about 65%. Give you an idea of the two. Micron obviously had a couple of their chips a month or two ago that were banned by the Chinese government. It wasn't a huge impact on them. But I think what the concern here, Josh, is that we set a bad precedence, right? Which is that, we prevent certain things coming in from China. They retaliate by preventing certain chips to come into their space. And you get this tit for tat. And then all of a sudden it becomes an issue where these companies are starting to say, hey, we could have done more in China, but our products are banned. We haven't quite got there yet, but it is something we need to follow very closely. I'm sure you guys reported about various people in the Chinese government that are no longer allowed to bring in iPhones. So, you know what I mean? This is kind of going back and forth, and hopefully it won't have a dramatic impact. So far, it has not, but it could if this continues.